Good day to each and everyone. I am Jessica Alonso, together with my groupmate Angelina Costa, and this is our report, Mr. Cesar Lombroso. Born in Verona on November 6, 1835, Cesar Lombroso studied medicine at the universities of Pavia, Padua, Vienna, and Genoa. His interest in psychology and psychiatry merged to his study of the physiology and anatomy of the brain and ultimately led to his anthropometric analysis of criminals. Italian criminologist Cesar Lombroso, 1835 to 1909, devised the now outmoded theory that criminality is determined by physiological traits, called the father of modern criminology. He concentrated attention on the study of the individual offender. Believing essentially that criminality was inherited and the criminals could be identified by physical attributes such as hawk-like noses and bloodshot eyes, Lombroso was one of the first people in his history to use scientific methods to study crime. Lombroso is the subject of a historical novel by former criminal barrister Diana Burnett. Here, writing for History Extra, Frederick tells you everything you need to know about him and explains why his influence in today's study of crime cannot be limited. It began in Italy in 1871 with a meeting between a criminal and a scientist. The criminal was a man named Joseph Villera, a notorious Calabrian thief and arsonist. The scientist was an army doctor called Cesar Lombroso, who had begun his career working in Attic Asylums and had then begun interested in crime and criminals while studying Italian soldiers. Now, he was trying to pinpoint the differences between lunatics, criminals, and normal individuals by examining inmates in Italian prisons. Lombroso writes, "At the sight of that skull, I seemed to see all of a sudden, lighted up as a vast plain under a flaming sky, the problem of the nature of the criminal, and an atavistic being who reproduces in his person the ferocious instincts of primitive." Thus were explained anatomically the enormous jaws, high cheekbones, prominent superciliary arches, solitary lines in the palms, extreme size of the orbits, handle-shaped or sessile ears found in criminals, savages and apes, insensibility to pain, extremely acute sight, tattooing, excessive idleness, love of orgies, and the irresistible craving for evil for its own sake, the desire not only to extinguish life in the victim, but to mutilate the corpse, tears its flesh, and drinks its blood. Essentially, Lombroso believed that criminality was inherited and that criminals could be identified by physical defects that confirmed them as being atavistic or savage. A thief, for example, could be identified by his expressive face, manual dexterity, and small, wandering eyes. Habitual murderers, meanwhile, had cold, glassy stares, bloodshot eyes, and a big, hawk-like noses, and rapists had jagged ears. He co-wrote his first book to examine the causes of female crime and concluded, among other things, that female criminals were far more ruthless than male, tended to be lustful and immodest, were shorter and more wrinkled, and had darker hair and smaller skulls than normal women. They did, however, suffer from less baldness, said Lombroso. Women who committed crimes of passion had prominent lower jaws and were more wicked than their male counterparts, he concluded. Essentially, Lombroso believed that criminality was inherited and that criminals could be identified by physical defects that confirmed them as being atavistic or savage. Inspired by his discovery, Lombroso continued his work and produced the first of 5 editions of Criminal Man in 1876. As a result, Lombroso became known as the father of modern criminology, one of the first to realize that crime and criminals could be studied scientifically. Lombroso's theory of the born criminal dominated thinking about criminal behavior in the late 19th and early 20th century. Throughout his career, Lombroso not only drew on the work of other criminal anthropologists throughout Europe, but also conducted many of his own experiments in order to prove his theories. These involve using bizarre contraptions to measure various body parts, and also more abstract things like sensitivity to pain and a propensity to tell untruths. Indeed, Lombroso eventually developed a rudimentary prototype of the lie detector. Lombroso was a well-known personality in Italy, giving sell-out lectures and talks, and commenting on all kinds of things in the popular press. He was interested in many things, and sometimes had difficulty in focusing on one thing at a time. One of his daughters, Paula, described a typical day in his life, composing on the typewriter, correcting proofs, running from Boca, his publisher, to the typesetter, from the typesetter to the library, and from the library to the laboratory in a frenzy of movement. And in the evening, not tired and wanting to go to the theater, to a peregrination of 2 or 3 of the city's theaters, taking in the first act at one, paying a flying visit to another and finishing the evening in a third. Lombroso was endlessly curious about crime, criminals and their motivations for offending, as well as their culture. As a result, he collected artifacts created by and belonging to prisoners that he had encountered during his long career. He also had in his possession death masks from various criminals who had been executed, as well as many skeletons and skulls. Initially, these were housed at his home and then at the University of Turin, where he worked. In 1892, Lombroso opened a museum for these artifacts. This closed in 1914 but reopened in Turin in 2010 and is well worth a visit. One of the most prominent exhibits was Lombroso's head in a jar of preservative, which he agreed would be donated upon his death in 1909. Lombroso's last book, published after his death, was a discussion of the biology of the spiritual world. Unsurprisingly, it had a mixed reception, and his research into ghosts, poltergeists, telepathy, and levitation appropriately disappeared into the ether. It did, however, add to the general discrediting of Lombroso's ideas over the years, and for some time his work was viewed as being more of curiosity valued than anything else. This was accentuated by the increasing popularity of eugenics and the use of biological theories of crime by the Nazis to justify the murder of millions of people. In the post-war period, other, more sociological, explanations for criminal behavior became more popular, and thus biological theories were largely rejected. He introduced the idea that criminality was not a matter of sin or free will, but could instead be a medical problem that needed to be examined by experts in that field. Lombroso also advocated examining the criminal as an individual rather than focusing on the crime alone. In addition to his pioneering work on the female offender, Lombroso was one of the first to use scientific methods to study crime, and he inspired many others to do the same. Today, neurocriminology draws on some of Lombroso's theories to explore causes of criminal behavior, examining, for example, whether or not brain injuries or genetic abnormalities can lead to criminality, or whether violence can be caused by a clinical disorder. Recent studies have found that there may be a genetic origin for violent crime and that personality traits including criminality can be deduced from facial features. The born criminal, it seems, might not be such a ridiculous area after all. So that's all. Once again, I am Jessica Alonso, together with my groupmate Angelina Costa, and this is our report, Mr. Cesar Lombroso.